Welcome to episode 5 of the Mindset Advantage podcast with Elliot Rowe and Dr. Trisha Cardner. So Trisha, tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Trisha Cardner, author of Positive Poker and Mental Game Coach to poker players, business executives, and semi-professional and professional athletes.
And I'm Elliot Rowe. I'm a hypnotherapist and I work with poker players and UFC fighters. And today on the show we've got Robert Drysdale. He's a 6-time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu and also a UFC fighter. So a bit of a different interview for you guys today. But before we go into that, what have you got for us today, Trisha?
Well, in today's psychology news you can use, I actually have a study called, and this is kind of a long title, so bear with me, folks. It's Quality of Professional Poker Players' Hands is Perceived Accurately from Arm Motions. The way I actually came by this study is a friend of the show, Zachary Elwood, who's the author of Reading Poker Tales, Verbal Poker Tales, sent it to me because he's actually going to write a whole big article dissecting it. And so I just want to give you the couple second overview. The bottom line is that they took people and they wanted to see how well they could read tells. And was it most important to look at a person's face? Was it most important to look at, say, their whole upper torso? Or was the most valuable information coming from arm movements and specifically the way they moved chips into the pot? Now, as you might surmise, poker players are really good at hiding their facial expressions. So that wasn't all that valuable. And in fact, that and the upper torso, if you saw the whole upper torso, that was not that valuable. What was the most valuable was focusing on how they moved their chips into the pot.
Wow, so less about poker face and more about chip movements.
Exactly. Because people, they know to keep, their facial expressions hidden as much as possible, especially if you've been around poker a while.
Yeah.
But the arm movements and how you move the chips into the pot is far more telling. So what players should do is A, start paying more attention to that in their opponents, and B, watch what you're doing your own self with the way you move chips into the pot.
Yeah, definitely really interesting information, really useful for our live players who are listening. And now we're going to give Robert a call. As I said, he's a 6-time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. He's one of the most accomplished Americans in Brazilian Jiu-jitsu that there have ever been. It's going to be interesting. We're going to be talking to him about how important mindset is in those sports, and we're going to be looking at things that poker players might be able to learn from somebody who's reached the top of another sport. So we'll give Robert a call now. So Robert, thanks for coming on the show. If you could just tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Thanks for having me, Elliot. Well, my name is Robert Drysdale. I've been training jiu-jitsu for 17 years. I started in Brazil. I've done about half my training in Brazil, the other half in the United States, and managed to be relatively successful in the field of jiu-jitsu. I pretty much exclusively, in my whole adult life, just training and competing in the national, international scene, gi and no gi. I made a transition to MMA about 6 years ago, and I currently fight for the UFC.
Awesome. So obviously our show's about mindset and the importance of that in different sports and activities. How important do you think mindset is for someone in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to be successful?
It's important on a number of different levels. I think not just on the emotional side, but on the tactical side too. Jiu-Jitsu is a highly strategical sport. You make split-second decisions all the time. And those split-second decisions will have a tremendous effect on the outcome of the match. Because it's so highly strategical, you really have to have a sharp mind. You have to react quickly to everything. Hesitation is your worst enemy. You got very small windows, and you have to take advantage of them. And if you're thinking about taking advantage of them, walking through that window, then you're too late. On the other side, there's the emotional side, which, the anxiety and the social pressure, the pressure you put on yourself, and that's a whole nother dimension, and they're both very complex, and it's not something you ever fully master, but you get better about it as you go. It's like anything else, lots of practice, and you never really fully get rid of the problem, but you get better. You get better as you go, and I think that's probably the most exciting thing about jiu-jitsu to me personally is a psychological aspect, because it's such a psychologically rich sport. I think that's probably the thing that attracts me the most.
That's very interesting that you say that it's a psychologically rich sport, because I kind of think about what you're saying in terms of having to anticipate what your opponent's going to do and having to make plans and things of that nature. And it really relates over to poker, which is kind of my area. So having said that, would you see any benefit to poker players perhaps studying the martial arts?
So, like, leaving aside the physical aspect, I think psychologically, you know, a lot of times I'll tell you one thing that happens a lot with me when I travel or when I just, you know, interact socially. People immediately look at you, a fighter, and they assume that you're some caveman who at any moment is going to, you know, start taking people down and punching them in the face. They assume you're this out of control individual, right?
Right.
Like I kid you not, sometimes I'm flying, there are people that they won't sit next to me. It's a true story. This has happened to me more than once. People ask the flight attendant to change, like if they can sit somewhere else. You know,
Wow.
and yeah, it does happen. Trust me, it happens. But in fact, I think fighters are some of the most emotionally stable people you ever meet. You have to be. You couldn't be that individual who's not in control of his emotions, and you have to have that. You know, use an expression as a poker face, like, you know. And I've had some of the most accomplished fighters in the world tell me that they're terrified when they're there. They just never show it. It's like, and like, there's no way. How can you? Like, you know, you don't. The people that don't seem to be that person who has any fear, and they've admitted to me, like, dude, I'm terrified, but I just don't show it. Like, you have to be in control, not only your facial expressions, but what you're going to do out there, and really, like, just kind of like really stay in the moment and not think about the fact of, well, you have to think about, oh, I might lose, or this might happen, and just being in the moment and kind of going on autopilot and being in the zone. And it's a zone where you're not really aware of time. It's an interesting place to be in. I think it's the ultimate form of meditation. You know, you're in a place you're not really aware of your surroundings. You're not really thinking about. You're just gone. You know, like 10 minutes go by and they seem like, what? No, 10 minutes. You're not even aware of time.
Yeah, it's an incredible process, psychological process that fighters go through, isn't it? Sort of the preparation leading up to it, the fight week, and then, as you say, the sort of the bizarre circumstances of you're fighting, you know, on the mats or in a cage in front of a crowd, and as you say, the sort of the stress creates strange things like the time distortion.
Yeah.
But you know, what I think is interesting is in psychology, we call that when you get in the zone and time seems to fly by like that, we call that being in flow.
Okay, I actually heard the expression before. Mm-hmm. I've heard that.
Yeah.
No, interesting. I call it a whole lot of firms that refer to it as autopilot. Mm-hmm. You know, you're gone. You're not really. You're just reacting to what your opponent does, and so yeah. Going back to your original question, I think that I can see jiu-jitsu being of help to any poker player, anyone is just really interested in the psychological aspect of things. You know, and it's really a battle against yourself. You think of yourself, I'm battling my opponent, and you know, it really is more about yourself, because once you're in control of your emotions and you can stick to your game plan, you can stay cool at all moments. Your opponent becomes like a very small problem. You know, he really is a small of your problems.
I think that would benefit poker players if at the table they could look at their opponents as just a small problem and see themselves as like the more important component.
Yeah, I could see that, absolutely.
And in terms of sort of the preparation, obviously we've worked in terms of mental preparation and things for fights. How important do you find it going through that process of visualizing the fight, having that game plan, and then how do you then sort of make that game plan happen in the cage?
You know, it's something I've always done more or less, I guess, instinctively, but I've always visualized a lot. Like, I like to be ready, because when those split-second decisions come, I don't want to hesitate. I don't want to have to think about what I'm going to do when that happens. I like to have an answer ready to fire. So, you know, I don't fully understand the neurological aspect of it and what's happening in my brain, but I go through the motions a million times in my head. You know, I imagine, I look at my game and what I can and can't do, and I look at my opponent, and there's like a silent understanding of what's going to happen. Like, I know what he's going to try. He knows what I'm going to try, and we know where no man's land is. So I know where my trench is, I know where his trench is, and I know where no man's land is going to be. So I know where the battle is going to take place. We both know that. And based off of that, we have our strategies. And and I have an idea of what he's going to try to do, right? So I'm considering a number of different situations within that scenario, and I put myself being successful in every single one of those situations. So there's no fixed game plan, because you can't have a fixed game plan, because it's going to go out the window as soon as something goes wrong. So you can't have one game plan. What you have is a series of game plans with an idea of where the fight's going to take place.
Is that the same for jiu-jitsu as well as MMA? Because obviously in MMA, the strengths and weaknesses are quite obvious, aren't they? But is it the same? So you know what a guy in jiu-jitsu, what his strengths and weaknesses are as well?
You know what? I like some people, like, they get almost mad at when you say this, some MMA fans, but I think jiu-jitsu is far more strategical. When it comes to the intellectual side and the psychological, the tactical aspect of jiu-jitsu is far richer than the one in MMA. MMA tactically it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times when I hear people talking about how that guy's a brilliant strategist, and I'm listening to the strategies, I'm like, I know that stuff when I was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, it really isn't that complicated. And I think that perhaps because there are points and advantages involved in jiu-jitsu, it adds a new element of strategy that lacks in MMA. But going back to the visualization thing, one thing I like to do a lot, and I've always done this, and I've worked with you, and you've helped me a lot with this, has been just like, I'll close my eyes, sometimes with my eyes open, and I'm just going through the motions. I think about that move over and over in my head, all the possible scenarios, and I have a good answer for every single one of those scenarios. So when that situation does occur, and it normally does go, it normally happens, the likely scenarios normally do occur. I have an answer ready. I'm not thinking, what am I going to do now? There's that hesitation can't be either. I know exactly what I'm going to do. Because I've been there a million times. I've thought about that situation so many times. So that means I highly recommend that to people in general. I think in all sports and all competitive endeavors. I teach this to my students. I tell them to do it. And I notice that some people have an easier time than others doing this.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Some people, the visualization comes more easily. I just, make a comment on that from a sports psychology standpoint. We know that when you are visualizing those muscle movements, the brain circuitry actually fires. So even though you're imagining it and you're not doing it, the brain fires as if you were physically doing it. So
that's exactly how I always felt about it. Like, a lot of people, they've always liked to drill. Like, they'll repeat a move like 1,000 times, and I've never done any of that. Like, I literally never drilled a single move in my life. But one thing I've always done was repeat the move in my head a million times. Like, I'd be driving home after practice and just going through the move, like, over and over and over and over. And the next day I'd be using it.
Right.
So I feel like I could see that, like, my nervous system is ready for that particular, because there's one exercise I do, and I teach this to my students, and I think that, and then I see some people have a time than others, but one thing I like to do is I like to see myself doing the move. I'll think about a move that I'm good at, and every time I close my eyes and I see myself doing that move, I can execute it in my mind, no problem. All right, and then I think about a move that I'm not good at. For example, there are moves that I've had a hard time with since I started training. They just don't come easily to me. And I close my eyes and I try to see myself doing it. I have a very hard time visualizing it. Like, I can't see it in my mind. Like, I'm trying to make it happen in my mind, and there's just a block, right? And that happens with some moves. And I don't know why some moves come easy, some, what others, I have a hard time with. But, like, I normally say, if you can see it in your mind, and you can see the entire sequence in your mind, you can do it live.
I agree with you 100%. But, can I ask you something else? Just for our listeners who are not as familiar with jiu-jitsu, my understanding is that it's the most difficult black belt to get. Can you just talk about, like, the process that someone would go through to earn a black belt in jiu-jitsu?
I think that maybe some of it has. Like, first of all, belts are a Western thing. They're not an Asian thing. We think of them as being Asians, but they're really not. They're Western. Like, when martial arts were brought to the West, we thought, how can we make money with this? And we went, okay, belts are a great way of making money, because it gives people like to feel that, I'm making progress, and the belt is a symbol of that, right? And the problem is that a lot of it's become commercialized. It's about, at martial arts, the original product has become more and more diluted, and the standards were lowered. And this is martial arts in general. I'm talking jiu-jitsu. I'm talking all of them. Because people want to hear what they want to hear. They don't want to hear what they need to hear. So students don't want to hear, you're not ready. You got to wait another year. They don't want to hear that. They want to say, you're doing great. You're awesome, buddy. Here you go, Johnny. There's a black belt. and then and that's kind of like the spirit of martial. Unfortunately, that's the spirit. So a lot of the discipline and the hard work's been lost in favor of, I don't want to lose a student. In fact, I'll just charge you money for this belt and I'll give you a belt. Jiu-jitsu, because Jiu-jitsu evolved largely in Brazil, and it was never a commercial enterprise. It was never profitable for anyone. Anyone who was doing Jiu-jitsu was doing it for love. Now it's sort of profitable over there, but it's nothing like over here. So in a way, the fact that you can make money from Jiu-Jitsu kept the sport pure. Because if your student wanted to leave the gym, it really didn't make that big of a difference. Because then you would never charge him for belts because he would never pay. So it kind of kept it pure in the sense where people only got promoted when they really, really earned it. Like sometimes, like it's normal to take 10 years to get a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. It's not unusual. I know 15 years. Some people get it in less time, and it's becoming more and more diluted. But especially because Jiu-Jitsu has grown as a sport, it's become commercialized. So people are, like I said, they're terrified of losing students, so they keep promoting people faster and faster. But I don't think it's harder because there's anything. It's nothing. I don't think there's anything to do with the technical side of things. I think that any martial art can be extremely complex. I think that Jiu-Jitsu, because it developed largely in Brazil and it was never financially profitable, it kept the sport pure. And I think that's the one thing that kept the standards higher. I think a lot of people that train Jiu-Jitsu, and they come from that generation where Jiu-Jitsu wasn't profitable, they're very idealistic about Jiu-Jitsu. They don't promote people equally. Like they hold them back. I can say I'm one of those. Like I hold my students back. They get mad. I have students to leave the gym. They come to my belt test, they fail, and they leave the gym. They get angry. And it hurts me financially, but I guess I have that idealistic view of what it ought to be and not what my next door neighbor is going to do. And like, that guy's going to promote him really quick. And there are a lot of people that feel the same way I do about it. In fact, I wouldn't say it's the majority of instructors, but maybe close to half. Okay. And I think it's the one thing that keeps the sport sort of, pure.
And what's the difference between someone who does achieve that black belt level and then the next stage up to someone who competes on the world level like you do and wins the competitions of the black belts? What do you think sets someone apart to reach that level?
Like the difference between just someone who gets a black belt and someone who's going to win titles with a black belt?
Exactly, yeah.
It's hard. I used to believe that there were no bad students, there were only bad teachers. And I think that's a good mindset to have because it really pushes you to be the best instructor you can be. With that being said, I'm not sure that's entirely true. I think that on the whole nature-nurture debate, I've always leaned towards, nature. I think, I see students that walk at a young age. From a young age, you see some kids, they just have it. They just got something the other kids don't. It's the mindset, it's the athletic ability, they just got this I'm going to win look in their, and it's normally after a certain age. With really young, you don't see that. I really think that kids at a very young age, they kind of have it hammered into their heads to be competitive and win. At a young age, they're just having fun. But some people just have that talent for learning things at a faster rate than others. And it's unfortunate, but I think it's the nature of sports, and it depends on what the kid is going to do with his talent, and you see this with adults, of course, it's the same thing. And any experienced instructor kind of has a good idea already who's going to go far and who isn't. With that being said, you get surprised every now and then. Every now and then you see someone, you look at them, this kid's not going anywhere. And, your whole theory is about, okay, I know who's going to go far and who's not, and it backfires. Every now and then there's that surprise case, and it's a true, like he'll make up for the fact that he has no talent with outstanding discipline. That does happen. Like those, it's a good story, and we like to tell. Well, it's a minority of cases, but they do happen. You got that guy has no talent, but he's in the gym every day, twice a day, and 10 years later, boom, he got good. But I think that the fundamental difference is, I think the people that go on to be successful, I think this goes for anything in life in general, is the people who they're not really content with themselves. There's something that's almost borders on, there's obsession. I don't know if obsession is the word, but there's this profound feeling of being unhappy with where you are and what you know. There's like, it's not enough. It's not enough. I think some people go, okay, I got a black belt. I can breathe now. I'm good. And then there are other people like, that's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And, sometimes I tell people this and they think I'm full of it when I say it, but I don't feel like I'm very knowledgeable in jiu-jitsu. I don't feel like I know enough. And I think that's what keeps me in the gym every day. The fact that when I go back home, I don't feel like I trained hard enough. Sometimes I feel like, man, I could have done another round, or I lost that exchange and I got taken down or whatever. like some people have that competitiveness in them and some people don't. And I think that's probably the main thing. I want to use the word ego, but not ego in a bad sense, not in the sense where you're arrogant. When I say ego, I mean in the sense where you're not really, there's this drive aimed at yourself. It's aimed at yourself, and there's a little voice inside your head telling you it's not good enough, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, that's just so interesting that you say that, because I'm real versed in the research literature on expertise and basically what makes somebody great at, whatever the endeavor. And it's just what you're talking about. It's having almost that obsession where you just always reaching for just a little bit more and a little bit higher. And that sounds exactly like what you're saying.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is, like, this is the question that gets me. How much of that is free will? How much of that is just the way you are? Mm-hmm. Like how much of that is like, that's the question. Because like some people just have it, and some people, I wonder if it comes easier to some people than others. And I think it's a fascinating topic, but I definitely see that in my students. I see it with other professional athletes I've dealt with. There was that, like I think there was like this little theme, at least with myself, speaking for myself, there's in the back of my mind, there was a little voice telling me, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough.
Wow. Well, that'll sure keep you going.
Yeah, and I like it like that. There's a part of me like it's sad in a way too, because you're never really content. There's something sad about it, because there's never like, okay, I'm good now. You don't really get satisfaction out of anything because it's not good enough. You win a gold medal today, and the next day, like, big deal. Well, on to the next one. You don't really enjoy anything. So there's something that's very, there's a part of me that wish I weren't like this. I would be able to enjoy accomplishments more, but like there's this constant feeling of, like you have to do a little bit more. You got to try a little bit harder. Well,
it sounds like this is a lifetime obsession for you that's not going to go away anytime soon.
Like I enjoy, like it's ironic that I've doing this my entire adult life, and there's nothing I'd rather do. I think on weekends, like sometimes I look back and I didn't have a normal youth. Like, I didn't go out. I didn't party. I spent my entire youth training. I was inside the gym. Sometimes I look back, I wonder, like, well, man, I could have done this, and I could have done that, and I'm like, there's no way, none of that is better than jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is about the coolest thing you can do in life, and of course I'm biased, but I can't think of anything better to do with my time.
And from that side of things, you've now started training people as well. How does that compare to competing yourself when you're training other people and then watching them in competition?
It's different, because you have to be, I guess in a way I am a psychologist, because you have to learn how to deal with it's one thing dealing with yourself, it's something else dealing with your students, because they're all different, and I think the biggest challenge being ahead of a group of people is trying to make the maximum amount of people happy. And it's not an easy thing to do, because people have different ideas, they have different visions, they have different opinions, and being the head of the group and trying to get everyone, to work and towards one common objective. It's an individual sport, but you're working in a group. So it has a group element to it. The people factor is the hard one, dealing with people, like it's one thing to deal with numbers. The number is always a number. People, they change their minds, they change their attitude, they get grumpy at each other. There's a social dynamic that goes into it that it's not always easy to deal with. But yeah, I find myself like all the time just trying to, like, I'm being the diplomat. I find myself being a mediator. I find myself being a psychologist. I find myself being a father figure sometimes. These are things that I wasn't expecting from jiu-jitsu when I first started training. It's much easier to be a student because you only have to worry about yourself. Yeah. Once you start teaching, you start to worry about your students, and I enjoy it. I enjoy watching my students succeed and see them develop. A lot of times I'm hard on them. I've been hard on them for, that's kind of how my attitude is, but my goal is not necessarily to make world champions, although, of course I look forward to that. But I think my primary goal is to make them better. When they walk through the door, whatever person they are, I mean, if they walk out of it, walk through that door, better person, just slightly better, I think that's the ultimate goal. And I think jiu-jitsu does that for people. It really, it's a lesson in humility, because you're constantly losing and getting beat up, and so you're getting back on your feet again, and you go again and again and again, and it really toughens you up in a lot of different ways. And I think that's the best part about it. It's not, I always tell my students this, I don't think they always get the message, but the best part is not the medal, it's not the accomplishment, it's not the belt, it's not the recognition. The best part is the hard work. And they don't get that. Like, man, the hard work sucks. I was like, I'm telling you, that's the best part. Yeah, it's cliche to say it's not about the destination, it's the journey, but It really is true. At least, in jiu-jitsu, like, and MMA as well. Like, I feel like the best part is not so much getting your hand raised or, whatever. It's the hard work and the journey and the lessons you learn. You don't learn a lot of these lessons. You don't learn these lessons if you buy a belt. If someone just hands you something, you don't learn those lessons. You just don't. You only learn those lessons if you put in the work and it's hard and you fail and you go home and you're angry at yourself and you walk out of the experience a better person. You're a little bit stronger. And I really think that that's the treasure right there.
Yeah, a lot of poker players can really benefit from thinking about what you're saying right here, because I feel like it's the same in poker. It's, you're going to lose a lot more than you're going to win, and you're going to get knocked down time after time, and you have to, keep getting back up and looking at what you can change. So I hope, our listeners who are poker players will, really take that to heart.
I think that anyone who's passionate, like something like poker, and I imagine it'd be, really nice to win millions of dollars. Recognition and feel like the alpha dog and all that, but I think that to probably pick top player in the world, I would have no idea who that is, and maybe a guy who just retired at one of the best in the world. And if you asked him what's the best part, he wouldn't say it's the money. He would say, man, I'd love just being able to play poker my whole life. I think that's probably, I'm guessing that would be his answer. I think a lot of times we have to not see our passions as a means to an end. It's an end in itself. That's how I look at jiu-jitsu. It's an end in itself. Jiu-jitsu is not something that's supposed to grant you something in the future. It's supposed to. That's what it is. The jiu-jitsu is for jiu-jitsu. It's a pleasure because it's great. It's fun. And that's the reward. It's the time you put into it.
And it's amazingly telling that you're saying, you don't feel you're knowledgeable enough. And I mean, I guess for the majority of Brazilian jiu-jitsu competitors around the country, that must sound crazy. But you're still following that same pathway, aren't you?
You know why? I mean, and of course I'm biased here. Like every single athlete, poker player out there is going to disagree with me, but I can't think of anything more complex than jiu-jitsu. I had a friend of mine in college, and he was a chess master, right? And he would always have arguments, which one was more complex, chess or jiu-jitsu. Like, I feel that I always won the arguments. Like, it's the human body. It's not a two-dimensional board. The human body is not only three-dimensional. Like, the amount of movements the human body can make, infinite. It's infinite times infinite. And I know I'm biased here, but every time I go to a tournament, like, I see something new. I'll see a new detail or a new move, something I've never seen before. And it just like opens all these new windows. Every time you open a new door, it's not really one door, it's another 20 doors and so on. And I really feel it's infinite. I actually say that I make the case that jiu-jitsu is a young sport.
Yeah.
It's at its infancy, and there's so many directions it can still take. I can only imagine what the next generations will be doing. I believe if you had a time machine and you put me in a time machine and had me compete 20 years from now, I get demolished. I get killed. The athletes, it's kind of like putting a swimmer from the 1970s with Michael Phelps in a pool.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get killed. I don't care. You could be Olympic gold medalist in the 1970s. You're like 6-7 seconds slower than Michael Phelps. I think that's the natural progression of all sports, and I like that. I enjoy that. And if I can play my little tiny part in that evolution, mission accomplished.
And as you say, it's considered by many to be the chess of martial arts, isn't it? In terms of the way that it's fought.
Yeah. It's the comparison is often made, and I think it's a fair comparison. I think that's one reason why it's become so popular so fast is because it's so, like I said, intellectually challenging. There's a physical element, there's the athletic ability, no doubt, but it's tied into the psychological and tactical aspect of it, the strategical aspect of it. And to me, that's the most interesting part. You put your hand here and all these other options open, but if you put your hand over there, all this other set of options open. And there's thousands of these little split-second decisions you're making every match, and you can't even put it on paper. Like, when I first moved here, people wanted me to, Rob, what's your jiu-jitsu curriculum? And I didn't know what they meant. Like, what are you talking about? What's your jiu-jitsu curriculum? What are the moves you teach? And I'm like, how do you even do that? Like, I couldn't quite get what people wanted me to do. And then now I get what people want me to do. And it's the way we teach beginners, and it's a good business model, but there's something that's not really honest about it because there are too many variables. You can't really write down what you do when your opponent does this. Yeah, this is my big critique of a lot of martial arts out there. They go, it's what I call the cookie cutter method. Oh, your opponent puts your hand here, you do that. You have no idea where your opponent's going to put his hands on. Yeah. You can't predict these things, you don't predict. I don't get to tell you where you're going to put your hand. So, how are you going to grab me or how are you going to attack me? These are all variables that you're not in control of. So you have to be ready to improvise. And I think that's what a good martial artist is. It does. Like he improvises on the spot. You cannot predict all outcomes. It's not something you can write down on a piece of paper and teach like that. You know, you have to be, I think your nervous system just got to be one of those things. It just triggers and it fires and it reacts to what your opponent does automatically. But you can't really write that down. It's too big of a category.
And that's why it's a martial art rather than, say, a martial science, isn't it? Do you see what I mean by the distinction there between the two?
Yes. It's not a math equation. You know, I often say that because jiu-jitsu 2 plus 2 is not 4. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 3. It depends. And then whenever I give people that answer, they're always angry at me. Like, people don't like, especially beginners, they hate that answer. And they ask because they want to learn the best move, right? What's the best move?
Right.
And I go, well, there's no such thing. And they go, well, I want to learn the best move, meaning I just want to learn that move and nothing else. Really what they're saying is a lazy way of learning things. They want to go, I want to learn the minimum necessary for me to be really, really good. So what's the best move? And I tell them, like, every circumstance, every situation is different. The circumstances change, and there's no such thing as best move. I can give you the most common ones, right? That's a good answer. But I notice that especially beginners, they get disappointed when I give them that great answer.
They've seen the adverts in the martial arts magazines, you know, we'll teach you the super kick.
Yeah, exactly. It's a super kick theory. That happens. You'd be surprised. Like, people walk in, they want to know what the super move is. And like, this is not a video game, man. You can't like punch in a combination and it's going to work the exact same way every time. And that's the beauty of it. Because if it were the same thing every single time, it'd be boring. Everyone would be doing the same move and no one would be interested. It's precisely because we can't predict the outcome. That, to me, that's the most fascinating thing about it. That's why it's interesting.
Yeah. What I think, I'm sorry. What I was going to say is what I think is so like neat about this or great about this is that in poker, the number one answer to any beginner question is it depends. And they get crazy. And it's just exactly what you're saying with jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, it changes. For example, I'll give you, I can't speak for poker, really jiu-jitsu. Like when you say, what do I do here? Look at the number of variables you have in a jiu-jitsu match, for example. How much time do you have left? What skills, what kind of game you have, what kind of game your opponent has. Maybe an injury. An injury changes everything. What is the score? Are the mats slippery or not? Like maybe, you know, are you tired? And like you have all these variables in the equation, and you can't possibly predict the result. It can't be done. It's decided on the spot, and no move is exactly like the last. So like, I armbar everyone. That guy, you know, he pulls off an armbar every single match the exact same way. But if you really look at it, it's never the exact same way. It looks, I mean, if an untrained eye, it might look like the same, but it's not really the same. It's a little bit different. The hand was positioned like that because his opponent had done something slightly different. And yeah, like no doubt, you can't predict the variables. You just have to be. My whole theory on teaching and fighting is you have to be ready to improvise on the spot. You have to be able to come up with a reasonable solution on the spot, on the go, without hesitation.
I mean, the comparables to what we deal with in poker are just the crossovers are just incredible. Mm-hmm. How similar those things are. Yeah, it's really great. Covering this sort of topic with you because, as I say, it should be very valuable for those listening who are playing that as well. Something I was going to mention is obviously the World Series comes up every year. A lot of the listeners here will be coming to Vegas. Is that something they could come and try out Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at your classes?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in Vegas about 90-95% of the time. Every now and then I'll travel on weekends and so on. But yeah, we're located at 2000 South Rainbow. It's on Rainbow and Sahara. It's big cross street in Vegas, if you know Vegas. Mm-hmm. And come by. We have beginners. We do gi-no-gi, MMA, kickboxing, wrestling, judo. We have a number of different disciplines in there, and everyone's welcome, from women, children, elderly. We have all sorts of different demographics. And yeah, everyone's welcome.
Man, that's excellent. I really advise people to give that a try. If you're in Vegas for 6 weeks, it's an unbelievable opportunity to go and train at a world-class facility.
I agree. I think people would be crazy not to stop by, meet Robert Drysdale, learn a few jiu-jitsu moves, keep you in shape, keep the blood flowing. I think it would just be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a number of poker players at the gym before, and I think they can see the similarities, and they can see jiu-jitsu as a form of career battle in some ways. And I think they enjoy. Like I think people in general enjoy jiu-jitsu. It's a highly addictive sport, no doubt.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Robert. Really appreciate your time today, and good luck in the future with all your fights.
Thanks, Elliot. Thanks, Tricia. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And talk to you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
So, Tricia, where can people find out about you?
Well, you're welcome to visit Amazon.com to pick up Positive Poker. I make training videos over at Red Chip Poker, and I'm working on my website, drtriciacardner.com, and my Twitter is the same, at Dr. Tricia Cardner.
And information on my coaching and my MP3s is available at pokermindcoach.com. If you're interested in the MMA or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu side, my website is fightermindset.com. We look forward to talking to you all next week. Bye.
Bye.